When is a discussion panel not a discussion panel?
Why isn't there an NRA representative on the podium? It's supposed to be a debate.
Well, no, actually, Zocalo is not a debate.
When is a discussion panel not a discussion panel? When it is a stacked panel, which is sadly the norm when it comes to gun control. Such was the case with a recent Zocalo public square event. A Zocalo, incidentally, is a public plaza in Mexico. You can tell when a panel has been stacked by their unintentional admissions, like when the moderator says,
Jacob Parakilis, who's a senior weapons researcher at Action on Armed Violence, which does stuff on guns all over the world, wrote at Zocalo yesterday that
the moderator was coached on the topic of gun policy by an organization that admits to wanting to reduce the availability of firearms to you. But the moderator's confessions did not stop there.
in Colorado, one of the states where there was progress.
Rephrasing what the moderator just said, he sees gun control as progress. Such ideological blindness certainly makes sense given this tiny tidbit.
Dr. Arthur Kellerman, who's affiliated with this institution we are all in.
For those without history books, he's referring to Arthur Kellerman, whose 1986 paper titled Protection or Peril has been roundly ridiculed for a slew of sloppy methodologies. So bad was this work that it once had 2 separate entries at junkscience.com. Kellerman is a hero within the gun control movement, and in that he is associated with this organization makes the organization suspect at first blush. Given such anti-scientific associations, some of the panel's other statements are as expected as they are comical.
That situation is exacerbated by the dearth of accessible, nonpartisan scientific research on the effects of guns and gun control measures upon society. So much of conversation this is limited by the fact that research has been limited, and, federal funding for research that might, lead to gun control has been banned since 1996.
So, decades of statistics collected and publicly presented by the FBI, the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the Center for Disease Control have been for naught? This is a common canard with the gun control movement because the data doesn't fit their goals. So they claim there is no data, no science, no study. What's really missing, though, is their souls. Thinking they hoodwinked this audience, the gun control activists next tried to sound authoritative and submit other cons.
California, in the last 20 years of implementing really significant gun regulation, gun violence has dropped by 56%. That's a really useful, important number to know and to have when you are talking about the efficacy of these laws. Our gun violence is going down while theirs is going up.
Interesting. California's violence rate is falling, but other states are not? The FBI reports that violence is declining all over the country, even where gun control laws basically do not exist. Someone had better call the FBI right away because their data must be wrong. Or perhaps, maybe, the gun control propagandist is. Did I mention she represents the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, an organization that dreams up and attempts to enact gun control laws? Did I also mention that the boss of the policeman on stage is a member of Michael Bloomberg's Mayors Against Illegal Guns, America's most rabid gun control lobbying group? Oddly, the moderator admits the point about the national fall in gun violence. He just does it out of context with the claim that the gun control lobbyist made.
And now in those 15 years, rates of homicide, non-negligent manslaughter in the U.S. have basically been cut in half. Violent crime overall is down 48%.
With no rational basis in their arguments, gun control activists lean on the absurd in the hopes that you will buy their bunk. Remember that Arthur Kellerman fellow and his outdated, inaccurate, and universally maligned paper, Protection or Peril? The panel had this to say.
That gun sitting in the house as you mentioned some scholar earlier who pointed out that you're more likely to get shot as a family member in a domestic dispute or in some other way use that gun against somebody in the family than to ward off an assailant.
Known as a target-rich environment, protection or peril includes suicides, which amounted to 85% of the dead people he tallied in a single county. He also only counted dead people and didn't bother with self-defense uses of guns that did not involve death, injury, or even a bullet being fired. He did not distinguish between two drug-dealing roommates or you and your kids as home shooting victims. And the list goes on and on and on, and yet he influences this group. Despite claiming a dearth of research on gun and crime policy, one panelist seemed to suddenly think there was sufficient study concerning another topic.
Interestingly, in case you aren't aware, we do have registration of all firearms now in California. It used to be just handguns, but as of 2014, it was a bill the governor just signed. It'll be long guns also. So we have total registration of all firearms here.
California has bans, licensing, and registration, and their violence rate is higher than the national average. Washington, D.C. and Chicago banned handguns outright, as well as licensing and registering everything that spits bullets, and their violence is positively third world. Somehow, this leader of a lawyers' group has missed out on decades of real-world policy failure. The reason is that she and others on the panel have a problem. Crime is falling, violence is falling, and gun availability is rising. To motivate undecided voters, they have to create a sense of fear and a false sense of political gridlock.
I think a lot of people in this room have a sense of we're deadlocked. What is the way out of the deadlock?
There is common ground there. It's just hard to get them out of their little circle.
Ignoring her snarkiness, just how many people are in this little circle of gun owners? Criminologists have been asking this question for decades, and their estimates fluctuate depending on current politics and how they think people may lie to pollsters. But the range of gun ownership in households is between 40 and 50% of all American homes having at least one firearm. With over 117 million households in America, that means upwards of 58 million gun owners, but even that number is underestimated since more than one person in a home can be a gun owner. That sure doesn't sound like
Little circle, little circle, little circle.
all this underhanded misinformation was required to stage an even grander piece of propaganda.
The NRA. The NRA pretty much, I've seen interviews with Wayne LaPierre and others where they say, well, would you support this and would you support that? And there's literally nothing that they will get behind on any level, including anything to do with mental health.
Someone should introduce Ms. Gun Control to Google. It took less than 15 seconds to find this news story concerning the very same NRA leader and his position on mental health. As ham-handed as her statement was, she really shamed herself a little later in the discussion. Keep in mind that this gun control advocate is a spokesperson for a group of lawyers who, by definition, should know the law. So when she said of the 2008 Heller decision that nullified a handgun ban in Washington, D.C.,
this was a new right. 2008, before 2008, you did not have an individual right to own a gun.
you would think lawyers would know about the infamous Dred Scott case, where owning a firearm was listed as a civil right, or the 1876 Cruikshank case, where gun ownership rights within the Second Amendment were confirmed, or even the contentious Miller case of 1939, where the court suggested that owning military arms might be protected. Given all that legal history, why would she say
this was a new right?
She does not get much right about American law or crime statistics or even about other countries.
In Israel, every gun has technology which stamps any bullet from the gun, so you know who that gun is registered to, where the bullet came from.
Funny thing about her claims that Israel has instituted ballistic fingerprinting or microstamping. I pinged connections within Israeli Military Industries, a company that makes firearms in Israel. I asked if microstamping was a requirement there. They had a one-word analysis. So this gun control advocate is calling for more gun control because she believes, or at least wants you to believe, that it works. She even opined on the center post of the Brady Bill, the 2-decade-old background check for retail sales of firearms.
What do we know of the effectiveness, the ability through background checks to, you can, and our ability to identify not just, who's at risk, but who might be at risk?
There's been millions of people who've tried to buy guns and go through background checks who've been turned down. So it does work.
These denied background checks are indeed effective in making criminals go to underground street dealers. You would think this would be impossible to do while in jail, but the Obama administration prosecutes only 0.1% of these documented felons and fugitives. So, great. Let's have a lot more of that. There is a method to her oh so plentiful madness. The gun control movement has been losing ground for decades. They lost the constitutional argument. They lost the criminological argument. They lost favor with the American people. She even admits this.
When I go testify at a hearing on gun legislation, even in California, I'm outnumbered 10-1 by gun rights advocates.
Which she somehow believes is not part of the problem.
But is that the way they vote?
Well, if you are outnumbered 10-1 at meetings, if the NRA has a much higher approval rating than a gun control president, if reducing gun control over the past decade has produced fewer gun deaths, then yes, dear, it is the way they vote. That is the way they will continue voting, especially after some gun control misinformation is exposed. Perhaps, though, this panel wasn't entirely stacked. This fellow, who looks like an eccentric academic, is, well, an academic. He is a professor of law in California and has had some of the most insightful observations provided during this panel.
Kind of real strong conviction about and support for self-defense and the right of self-defense and the belief that when the state can't be there to protect you, damage, you should be able to protect yourself. But the number of deaths from guns, a grossly disproportionate number of those are coming from the inner city. To get at that problem, we're going to have to, number one, feel as much empathy for the kids who are killed by inner city gun violence as we do for the Sandy Hook kids, making it so that people aren't trapped behind ghetto walls which breed gun violence. I remember a tradition in which activists who were concerned about government oppression, the Leviathan state, those sort of things, picked up firearms to express that concern. They were called the Black Panthers, right? And they started saying, we are concerned, we want the Second Amendment to help us regulate the police, who they felt were being oppressive in their community. But I am concerned about the Second Amendment. And he talked about he grew up in the inner city of Akron, Ohio, so did I. I brushed my teeth and sat at breakfast with a gun because we were in the highest crime neighborhood in Akron. There were 12-year-old prostitutes within 50 yards of where we were. There was a homeless shelter, everything else. And I gained reassurance from that high crime area having that gun as an 11 and 12-year-old.